the recording. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for coming around. This remains the Young African Scientists platform, where we are putting together skills training programs for our folks on the continent and around the world. And this is meant to connect the current generation to the legends of our time who have done remarkable work around the world. Today, we have Professor Gebisa Ejeta, originally from Ethiopia, with us, and he's going to present. And we're going to have a very friendly conversation today. It will not be a serious presentation mood. It will be a by the fireside presentation mood. And so we are going to have 3 sessions. The first session, we are going to allow the good professor to give us an introductory remark. And then we will enter into an interactive session where I will ask him a couple of questions based on what he presents to us and some areas that we have already communicated on. And then we'll open the lines for everyone to ask a question if you have any questions. So this is going to be the format. To start, I would like to invite Bernice Abraham, who is a PhD candidate in Professor Wole Soboyejo's group, to introduce our professor, and then from there, our professor will just start with a brief introduction for us. So Bernice, if you are ready, please, you can go ahead.
All right. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
So good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Young African Scientists lecture series. I have the privilege today to introduce a very distinguished professor, and I'm going to read his profile. Professor Gebisa Ejeta is Distinguished Professor of Plant Breeding and Genetics and International Agriculture, Executive Director of the Center for Global Food Security, and Presidential Fellow for Food Security and Sustainable Global Development at Purdue University. Professor Ejeta has been a member of the faculty of Purdue University since 1984. His career has been devoted to education, research, and international development, with contributions in human and institutional capacity building, in technology and development transfer, as well as in policy advocacy for science, technology, and innovations that change livelihoods. Professor Ejeta has served at the highest level of science program and policy advisory for several international development agencies. He has served at the United States government in several capacities, including as Special Advisor to the USAID Administrator, Dr. Rajiv Shah, and a Science Envoy of the U.S. State Department before being appointed by President Obama as member of the Board for International Food and Agricultural Development in 2011. In addition to BIFAD, he has served on the boards of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, the International Water Management Institute, the Chicago Council for Global Affairs Food and Agricultural Program, the U.S. National Academy of Science Board on Agriculture and Natural Resources, and on the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's first scientific advisory board. A 2009 World Food Prize laureate, recipient of a National Medal of Science from the President of the United States, and a National Medal of Honor for Science from the President of Ethiopia. Professor Ejeta is a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, Fellow of the American Society of Agronomy, Fellow of the Crop Science Society of America, and Fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. Today, we have the honor of having him with us for this lecture series, and I'll hand over to Dr. Tabiri to welcome him on stage.
All right, so thank you very much, Bernice. And Professor Gebisa, please, you have the time now to do your introductory presentation to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tabiri. What I would do is I'll make a personal introduction about who I am, a little bit about my academic journey, and some of my professional adventures, although Dennis had done a great job in reading out a lot of my engagements in the past. And then I will also speak as an introduction in terms of what my hope and aspirations are for the youth in Africa, and by making an introduction to our program, our RIST, and the premise for our RIST in beginning, and what we hope to achieve through this program, briefly. In terms of my personal background and who I am, as you heard, I'm from Ethiopia, born and raised in the west central highlands of Ethiopia, coming from a very humble background. As many of our Africans in my age come from rural areas, and I did come from a rural area of Africa, Ethiopia, and going to school was a very big challenge for me. It was a challenge because there wasn't a school close to my village. So I had to travel 20 kilometers one way, go to school and stay on board with friends and family there. And then Sundays, on Fridays, I go back to bring my weekly ration. And this is, as a 9 and 10-year-old, I did that through elementary school. So this is a challenge that I had, a very difficult and very stressful time in terms of the ease in which a child needed to have to be able to go to school and have 3 meals a day, and those are the things that I was not provided to me. So I carry my weekly ration on my head, going to school, and then go back to bring up my weekly ration again the next week. So that we did that for about 4 or 5 years, and I was the first one to start in my village, and then later on some friends joined me. So it was quite a fun journey to go up and down to school with friends, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids together. So that was the hardest part for me, was in those early days when I was a young kid with having no family close by. I was raised by my mother, a single mother, and so the means were very, very limited to allow any comfort and luxury for a child that age that I needed to have. I didn't. But then I was very fortunate. When I finished grade school, 8th grade, I hit a lottery, and that is that in Ethiopia in those days, you take an elementary exam, a final exam at the end of 8th grade. And if you score well and you chose your field of study that you want to study in high school, and in those days there were about 4 boarding schools in Ethiopia. So if you chose, they were in the area of agriculture, technical school, business school. There were 4 of them that we had, and I was very fortunate. I chose the one in agriculture, and it happened to be that school was supported by an American government. Oklahoma State University was given the resources to open up a high school and college in Ethiopia as part of the Marshall Plan, the European Marshall Plan that was extended to African countries right at the end of the Second World War. So I was very fortunate to get that scholarship, and my 4 years of high school were exactly the opposite of my 4 years of elementary school, because there was a lot more provision was given to us. We were fed 3 meals a day. They sent us clothing twice a year we were given, and we slept in clean bed with sheets and blankets, and it was a luxury for our young kids, particularly for those of us who come from rural areas. And I usually dramatize my story when I tell it for people so they would understand. In my home, I lived in a thatched hut with a mud floor, and I was sleeping on the floor one night, and the next night I went to my high school. I was moved overnight to almost being like in America because I got an American facility there and were living in comfortable situation there. So I complain. I lament a lot about my poverty, but really my poverty was really in the early days of my childhood. Once I got to high school, I did not see poverty again. So I finished high school in comfort and then went to another boarding school in college in Ethiopia. So I just want to give you an impression of the difficult childhood that I had as a young kid with only a mother and being supported in rural areas. So that was my background, and then the high school I chose was a vocational school for agriculture, because when the Americans came to Ethiopia to open a university, there was no building that they could establish it in, and so they started this high school had already started as it was an old Italian camp that was left at the end of the Second World War, and they they remodeled that, and so it became a high school. That was a high school. The college started there. When the college was built, then the college moved, and that high school was left there so that it would continue to generate young kids who can potentially go to agricultural college or become extension agents for serving the Ministry of Agriculture. So those were the options that we had. Fortunately, I did well in high school and qualified in the exam, so I was able to move to the college and got that opportunity. And again, when I went to college, I had similar opportunities, so I was able to do the best work that I could do, and that led me to opportunities to graduate school and so on. So the story that I like to tell is when I started college, at the end of the second year, we normally are given the choice to decide what to major in. I used to be good in math as a young kid, so I thought maybe I'll go to engineering, and our college had majors in agricultural engineering, in the plant sciences, in animal science, and so on. And so I decided I would major in engineering, and I went to class, and I remember taking classes in two courses that I could not really tell what I would do with that kind of knowledge. The courses were statics and dynamics, and I remember them still very basic engineering courses. And I went to my advisor and said, I don't know what I would do studying with what I'm learning in the College of Engineering, and had a conversation with the department head. He encouraged me to stay with it. You're a good student. You're going to do well. There's a lot of opportunities in engineering, but he couldn't give me examples or things like that. So I went to the Department of Plant Sciences, and I was going to make a round. And so the plant science department head told me he had just returned from his PhD program in the University of Minnesota. And when he was there, he heard that a fellow named Norman Borlaug had just received the Nobel Peace Prize for agriculture. And he said, you see, if you were to study plant sciences, you can do in the fields like genetics and so on, you can do what Norman Borlaug did, and you can help the poor in developing countries. So I literally took him to that with that. And next day I went back and switched my major to study plant sciences. And as it turned out, it was game changing for me. I ended up studying plant sciences as an undergraduate, and from there I moved on to graduate school, and I came to Purdue University, where I've been teaching here for 40 years. and when came to Purdue and received my PhD. And from there, I will speak a little bit about my professional activities. My first job out of graduate school was working for an international agricultural research center called ICRISAT. My country was in a war at the time, which it is again now. And at that time, I couldn't go back. So I said I would look for a job in Africa and wrote to the international centers, particularly ICRISAT. And they accepted me, and they said, we're gonna assign you to the country of Sudan, next door to my country. So that was my first job. I started there 5 years. And in those days, I was very hungry, and meaning I just wanted to do well. Hungry for success is what I mean. And so I was very successful at the end of the 5 years, where I was able to develop and release the first commercial sorghum hybrid that was drought tolerant that the Sudanese wanted, and I committed my 5 years there to doing that. That was recognized widely, and I fed people in the countryside. In the first 10 years after that, about 1 million acres were being grown with that hybrid for several years in a row. So it just gave me a good start, and eventually came back to teach at Purdue University when my children got to be school age, and we wanted to find schools in English where they can go to school. So we moved over here. And then from Purdue, I continued to work in the area of international agriculture. A lot of it that you may have heard, those of you who have heard about me may have heard the things that we were able to get done at Purdue University in collaboration with a number of African countries, particularly. The focus and drive I had was to do something with the discoveries that I make. That was really the singular focus that I had, was not necessarily the scholarship as much as I got an excitement out of what I did with the work to help the poor in developing countries. That was my primary focus, and I stayed true and remained true to that throughout my career. Let me stop because some of the experiences and the service and policy advocacy and so on that I had done, in addition to the scholarship and the scholarly work, has been stated by Dennis. So from that, I just thought maybe I'll talk about ARIST a little bit. This organization that Tabiri may have introduced you to is it's a brainchild of my colleague Wally Soboyeje, who is the president of SUNY Polytechnic University today. Wally and I were fortunate to be designated on the UN Secretary General's Scientific Advisory Board, and we happened to have met there, and we've gotten to know each other. And so Wally invited me to join him on this ARIST initiative, and then I turned around and also brought in a person that I knew, who I thought would be a good protagonist for us, and that was President of the African Development Bank, Akin Adesina. So the three of us got talking, and Akin was still the president of the African Development Bank, and that's where the program started. And then with the energy and drive my colleague Wally have behind it, so we're in the middle of putting together programs in a number of African countries. That's maybe a short, brief summary of that. But with that, I just want to talk about this dividend we all talk about, the youth dividend in the continent. That my premise for us getting to join ARIST is that we have had a lot of problems getting technology in the continent of Africa, or or once the technology gets there, that really doesn't generate impact, we need to change that. The way to change that is to engage African institutions themselves in the technology development and build a human capacity, strengthen the local institutions, and work with people there in technology generation, as well as, when the technology is in our hands, find a way to have that technology generate impact on the ground. The reason why we haven't had that in the past was because our basic institutions were very weak. The human capital was relatively weaker. But in the last 20 years, and the beginning of this century, we really have made great advances in Africa in building a number of new institutions, both in academic institutions. Scientific institutions have also made significant progress, and the human capacity base is strengthening. But there is one missing element in my mind that really is very critical, and that is we really don't have the private sector strengthened in the countries in Africa. The public programs are leading a lot of the initiatives and pushing, both serving in supporting education and supporting research, and also in trying to deliver technology once those technologies have been developed in this research institution. So we need to change that. For that, I think the youth in Africa are going to be very important. I just recently listened to and read a piece by the president of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, who gave a talk under a title he dubbed "All Roads Lead to Jobs," to make a point of his concern about the future of young people around the world. And he used some statistics to make his point. The statistics he gave was, by 2050, more than 80% of the world's population will live in what today we consider to be developing countries. So instead of making advance, he's talking about a slack globally. That in just 10, 15 years, 1.2 billion young people will come across a labor market. For those, there would only be jobs for about 400 million jobs, leaving a gap of 800 jobs for job seekers in the continent. Granted, these are estimates, but they will definitely define the century's future. But the message he is declaring is that if we match it with the right investment today, and giving the young people opportunities for education and opportunities for getting sharp technologies that they can utilize, then they would be a tremendous engine of growth. Otherwise, there could be, instead of being an asset, they could be a burden on the continent. But if we fail to act in the vigor and the optimism of your generation, will lead to despair. It will fuel instability, fuel unrest, and fuel for mass migration. Another key statistic he cited was 90% of the jobs will come from the private sector. More likely in the developed world, and I add that unless Africa wakes up to open doors of opportunity to the private sector, that is today almost non-existent or minuscule, the African youth will be reaching for opportunities outside the continent, in North America, Western Europe, and even Asia. But this is provided that they have the proper training. They will be well equipped to serve their nation, and if that opportunity doesn't exist in their nation, they would be able to serve other nations. So that the opportunity to make sure that our next generation is well educated, well equipped with knowledge, and their institutions are providing those skill sets is extremely important. That's what we are committing to, and that's what we hope that you will be joining in participating in this potential opportunity that may arise as a result of this small initiative that we're trying to kick off. Tabiri, let me stop here and maybe give opportunities for specific questions and interaction from you.
Yes, Prof. Thank you very much. And where you landed is where I want us to start the interaction with. So which areas do you see the skill sets of the future? We have a lot of people here doing their master's, first degree, and PhDs. So which areas do you really think the skill sets will be tilting towards in the near future?
In answering that, I will probably not prioritize areas of training as such, but go back to the premise that I made. We have to have educational programs in the continent that are purpose-driven. We need to have those institutions to be purpose-driven. Tabiri, you are now staying in the United States as a postdoc. Many of our US universities, particularly engineering programs, are providing education to their young people, both graduate and undergraduate, with the idea that these people would go out and be working in the private sector. So they're training them with the skill set that the private sector needs. I really think we need to have encouragement by the government to open doors of opportunity for the private sector to develop across the board in many of our African countries. Once that is done, then tailor making the education to private sector that are forming anew across the entire, particularly in my background of agriculture, across the value chain of food and agriculture. If we do that, and if there are opening opportunities for private sector to pick up areas of emphasis that they want to start business in, and then they are going to need graduates to work with them, and then they're going to also produce products that the market needs once they get into working in the factories as well. So what I'm connecting here is, in the past, we have had major revolutions in Africa, in the world, in science, particularly in agricultural sciences. Those revolutions, including the Green Revolution, and before that, hybrid technology that really transformed American agriculture, and then later on, the biotechnology, those we didn't have African institutions preparing young people for the field. We didn't have African private sector to prepare to take opportunities for business in those areas. We need to be very deliberate in both in the education component as well as in opening up private sector business activities to make sure that they're producing products that the market of communities need. We need to be very deliberate across the board. And so the emphasis then, to return to your question, the emphasis then is the new technology that is emerging now is the digital technology. That's where we need to engage African youth to be not to miss with this opportunity that is coming. This is the new revolution that I don't want us to miss that. The digital technology to solve Africa's problem in the value chain for food and agriculture and for the various areas in terms of the other engineering areas and material sciences, for example. So digital technologies across the board where African young people are hungry for it and are willing to take up if those opportunities are there for them for the training purposes, as well as hopefully the countries would begin open doors of opportunity for private sector to engage in creating businesses that would add value to the products that are generated in our country and across many of the products that we're exporting today in your country, Ghana, in Nigeria, and places like that, where raw materials are being shipped out, and including in mine as well in several products. We need to create these businesses. So we need to put, in sequence, and I think those in private sector businesses need to be there, and educational programs need to be there to produce those kinds of people with that kind of capability that would open up these private businesses, and then they would be opening up doors of opportunity for new graduates to go in the market. All of these need to go together, and that's where we have the greatest challenges, convincing African governments to make sure that these opportunities are there for young people. Everybody talks about the young being the potential for the continent, but we need to create opportunities for them, beginning with the trainings that we provide. And so the emphasis that we're doing in our list is really engage them in digital technologies for young Africans, not only in engineering, but across the board, computer sciences in other areas where the problems in agriculture and other areas can potentially be solved. In agriculture, I think, a lot of what we do is increase production, but beyond that, other than feeding people the same way that we fed them in the past, we really haven't created processing industry, created processing potentials for the byproducts that would come from agricultural product, and that value chain is what needs to be connected for the future of the continent. If the economy of many African countries can be moving from just living the same old way where we really produce this meager produce and not really capturing processing. And for example, in food, I can talk about seed processing. I can talk about grain processing. I can talk about food products and byproducts for feed, feeding dairy, feeding poultry, feeding fattening programs, so that instead of local consumption, find ways. For example, in the Middle East, there are several opportunities for market opportunities for agriculture products that can be exported not only in the Middle East, in any other country for that matter, but I'm looking at the markets that are very close to us, in addition to regional marketing within the continent. But the Middle East is a great opportunity for feeding a growing population there as well, people with means that can buy these products if those products are high quality and readily processed.
Yeah, Prof. So I was actually going to follow up for you to zero in on agriculture, but you did that towards the end, so I think I'll move on. So I want us to go back to your days in Sudan, when it all started. You mentioned that you were very hungry then. So what were, let's say, the top 4 things that possibly you focused on in order to get you focused to make the impact that you did at that time?
Yeah, part of being a research scientist is understanding the problem. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Do you have the skill sets to address that? Can you develop the right methodology to address the problem? And when I went to Sudan, the first thing I noticed was, of all the countries in the continent, sorghum is the most important crop in Sudan than many other places. The diets of Sudanese are really dominated by sorghum and millets. And I know there are 2 crops that are important in the country: sorghum as a food crop, as a food staple, and then cotton as a market opportunity that usually export to other countries. So if you become a breeder in Sudan, in cotton and sorghum, you're really addressing the most significant agenda for them. So I was given that chance, and immediately I noticed that the country, as different than the country I grew up with, has erratic rainfall pattern. And so the problem that constantly face is drought. And so I said, I need to address the drought problem. And so to be able to do that, I need to develop hybrids in sorghum. And to be able to develop that, I need to partner with other scientists in the country, so we would have an interdisciplinary program to address the problems of drought through various means. And once we began to identify some of these solutions, it is important to work with the leadership in the country and to make sure that you inform the people and political leaders to make sure that they are aware of the technologies that are coming up. And so my focus was totally driven to make sure that I have systematic approaches to the research methodologies that I develop and testing in various regions. And so I I understood the weather patterns and knew the rainfall patterns in the country. And from that, I devised an appropriate location to evaluate materials and also the kind of materials that I would develop so that they can maybe custom made for these variable conditions. And so one of the things that I would say is you need to, as you become a mature scientist, one of the things that would help you is also you develop your character at the same time. Your character, your integrity is very important. As you work with people, those things are extremely important. Not only your intellect, but the character, how you work with other people is extremely important. So to me, the focus is understanding the problem, and then for that, putting forth the collaborative team, not only in the country, but internationally, to make sure that we address the problem systematically, pulling together the knowledge base that is available in several facilities in many of the research programs around the world. With the international center I was part of, it was very easy for me to make connections and then I connected with the local programs as well. And those were the things that made a difference in terms. Many people have developed varieties and made them available, but really the methods that we followed to be disciplined, to be deliberate in terms of channeling, finding ways to get that done, including every step of the way, what is the next stage to make sure that after the varieties were developed, we needed to make sure that the delivery systems are in place. And so I wrote a proposal, wrote a grant, and then grant was funded, and that led to resources that was made available to establish the first private seed companies in the country. So I think in terms of numbers, things that I will enumerate for you, I really think be disciplined. We need to work. You have the right work ethic. You have to have the discipline, but also you have to have the integrity and character to work with people well, so that you are accepted. And one of the things that made it easy for me in Sudan was they immediately identified me as one of theirs, and so they allowed me to operate freely, and they helped me every step of the way, made me a better scientist than I could have been without the assistance of those individuals on the ground that were either my colleagues or people who are watching from outside and watching that what I'm doing was in the best interest of their country.
Thank you, Prof. Now, so the channels are open. You can send your question by chat in the chat box, and we'll read those questions to Prof. And when we pass the 50 mark, 250 from my side, we will then open the lines for anybody to unmute and get opportunity to ask Prof a question as well. So, Prof, so let me just ask you something that I think everybody here would love to hear. For those that are just out of school from PhD, those that are working on their PhD and masters, we would want to also know, how did you transform your work to the grants approach? How did you approach the grants that you won at the very first beginning when you had not won any grant before? How was the process? Prof. Shoboyejo tells us about he failing like 5 times before he finally landed the first one. So how was your process, and what was the things that actually gave you success in the beginning?
It's always challenging in the beginning. The challenge The challenge is mainly because you are new to the place, and you do not, even if you're an American, you may be in a place where you have to develop contacts and be those contacts not both in the societies, in the scientific society that you work with. You need to be recognized as an individual. And now that as you begin, you need to know people ahead of you who have done similar things like what you're doing, or if not direct, but somehow people that you have grown to appreciate as a result of reading their work. So getting to know people and making contacts is very important. And it becomes even more important at the funding agencies. They're not easy to get to know. You just have to begin to work to show that by the grants that you submit. And you're going to need some initial success. And some of that is achieved perhaps by collaborating with other scientists and becoming a member of a team in other faculty. But as you begin your contacts, as you begin, you understand the operations of the granting agency and how they work, and the panels that they're putting together, the panel leaders they have, getting to know them, so that all of a sudden your first proposal may be successful. It's a struggle, but eventually it would happen. It happened for others. There is no reason why it wouldn't happen for you. But this may not be the right time to talk about this, because this is where the door is jammed on everybody now, and that those opportunities are not there. But in general, getting to know the granting agencies is important. Getting to know your colleagues and being recognized, identified there, and very often they become your supporters in the long run, because if, even though they're competing with you, they may like the ideas that you have. You can help them in their programs and be generous with that, and then helping others, and they would help you back. And so that's how you would begin to build a team. But in general, I would be the first one to admit that those early years were hard. But once you get started, your work would be recognized, your thought process is appreciated, and then the grants agencies may look to you to seeing a proposal that comes to you because they have seen it to be successful in one of the early successful proposals you submitted. So team building within your university, outside your university, making that collaborative team is very important. But to expect people to be generous to you, you need to be generous also, so that you reach out to help others, so that they can respond when you ask for help. And so helping each other is a common phenomenon that happens in a research community, but slowly building your program and getting some name recognition is going to be important, but it takes time. I know the difference between your generation and mine is you guys want instant success, and in our stage we didn't know a lot, and we didn't have the kind of communications that you have today, and so we really had a very slow growth process, and we were okay with that. I think it took time, but eventually it would deliver. And so that's what I told people. Even when I was struggling, people said, "Oh, you need to be recognized for this and that." I said, "My recognition will come the day it does, but I'm happy with what I'm doing." The reason why I continue to say that is I really didn't make. I wanted to be promoted so that I can get tenure. Beyond that, success was not what I was really running after. What I was running after was being able to do the things that I like to do, so that I can make a difference with the results of my work, where I know the need were. And that's why I focused. Everything that I have done was with Africa in mind.
So, Prof, there are a couple of things when we come across on your CV, we scream. And the World Food Prize and all those awards that you got. So I just want to ask you about those. What actually got you there? What were the projects that got nominated and eventually got you those awards? Those
I'm going to
international
ask you to
awards?
repeat that, Tabiri. My phone rang, and
Yes. So I'm just asking about the awards that you've gotten so far.
yeah.
None of them in particular, just you can just talk about a few of them. What were the work that got nominated and got recognized for you to get those awards? And when you were doing those work, did you know that you were doing something that could win an award or something?
I use the World Food Prize as an example, as a startup conversation. This may be like a surprise to people who are hearing me say this. The work that I did in the Sudan was, here just I was 28 years old when I finished my PhD. I was put in a foreign country to help the agriculture of a country that I didn't know. But just because I was very deliberate about trying to solve that problem, and the opportunities led to a situation where I was able to address it in a meaningful way. So that program was extremely successful because of the manner in which I went deliberately to address that problem, solving the problem in a meaningful way. And that was recognized even right there because of the impact that it had on its people. I had a sense that someday that work would be recognized. And I have no idea how it happened, but it was, that hybrid hit the market in 1983. In 84, there was a drought in Africa. And I had just arrived at Purdue campus in 1984 as a system professor. And there was a United Nations conference on climate change, on climate and drought. In those days, not climate, on drought and the emerging famine in Africa. And Secretary of State Schultz was speaking in front of the United Nations. And he said at the time that there are these challenges emerging and we need to make sure that assistance is provided to African countries and the opportunities to do this through science. And then he said a young assistant professor, an Ethiopian young scientist working for Purdue University, had developed the first commercial sorghum hybrid in the world. For that to come from the mouth of the US Secretary of State was just mind-boggling, because I never thought that my work was that important at the global level, and the fact that it was mentioned put the idea that maybe it is a lot more important than I thought. So when I came here, I'd done some work in a totally different area, again, a major African problem, that's solving the parasitic weed striga being a problem. And that was, again, another systematic approach that we had used in understanding not only the problem, but in this case, in the biological process that goes through the parasitism and the relationship between the host plant and the parasitic weed. And that we come up with a way to break down that cycle of communication between the parasite and the weed, eventually led to a development of another set of drought, not only drought tolerant, now parasitic resistant sorghums. So a combination of the two was what the nominators put together, eventually submitting a nomination to the World Food Prize. And what I would tell you, and I've told people before, my colleagues at Purdue didn't nominate me. Somebody somewhere came to Purdue and said, this work in Sudan and in Africa need to be recognized. You guys need to nominate this young scientist that you have. And so, again, this is not something you can cultivate and get to work for you. And as I said, a good evidence of that is my colleagues at Purdue didn't nominate me. It was somebody from outside who suggested that they nominate me. They eventually did.
Yeah. So that is something that is interesting. What I'm tempted to ask will go deep into the science of it, but maybe we can touch on it. We have you here, so why not? So
Sure.
how do you think into experiments? When you're developing a methodology for experiments, what are the questions you ask in your mind that guides the process? So you mentioned systematic approach in research. So what are some of the things that you do that are key, that you have a lot of PhD students and masters and
Good.
undergrad students here who are doing research in the labs who are probably stuck or something. So how do you approach the scientific methodology problem?
I think great question. I think the parasitic weed resistance work is really a great example to talk about how you'd go about to tackle a problem. I know in the 5 years I worked in Africa, this striga problem was a huge problem. It devastates a crop. When you get that weed, it stifles growth, it sucks up the food, and it grows, the weed grows, but the host plant dies. What that suggests is, and also people had written about, and that the parasitic weed, the weed itself, and the host plant have some kind of biological relationship. And to be succinct about it, the weed seeds are inundating the soils of Africa. They're in large numbers in tropical soils. And the weed does not germinate until it's conditioned by environmental factors. This conditioning is very, very simple. It doesn't require a lot of sophistication. It was warm temperatures and some moisture. And the African soils get that in the beginning of the rainy season. So when the rains begin, the soils get wet, and the temperature is still warm. And so the weed then gets conditioned, maybe satisfies these conditions of warm temperature and the moisture. And what we later discovered was that we discovered the weed seed did not germinate without a chemical stimulus that comes out of the host plant. That is to say, the host plant exudes some organic compounds into the soil, which then elicits the germination of the weed seed. And then the weed seed would germinate, but it has to attach itself to something. So these roots the host plant is germinating about the same time, the host plant, the host seed, and then it begins to form roots. And these roots are the ones that are exuding these compounds. And then the parasitic weed turns around, establishes itself on the host plant root. But to be able to do that, it requires yet another chemical signal that is exuded by the roots that it needs for hostorial formation. And these are roots on the parasite that allows it to establish itself on the host plant. Once it gets that, this weed we later found out in the lab, it can even attach itself on the bottom of a petri dish, on a dish itself. So these roots are tied. But when it gets the root of the host plant, that's what it would attach itself. So this communication then is there, the biological communication. Once we understood that, we began to look for what those compounds are. So a lot of petri dish work, we're germinating the seed, we're germinating the parasite, and beginning to look at organic compounds. And that's when we formed collaboration with a biochemist and a postdoc working between he and I together. And so when we were doing this, there was a time when biotechnology is hitting the ground, and people were talking about how to dissect complex traits into simpler components. And at that time, immediately, we were working on a drought program when they were saying this. I said, maybe this thing is a lot more applicable in the striga problem than it is in the drought, because we can tell there are individual steps that lead to the total parasitism in the parasitic weed. So that really is what triggered our search for these chemical components, eventually dissecting them into each stages of the parasitism, identifying individual compounds, and then putting them together for total striga resistance in the biology that we succeeded. So again, the main message again is understanding the biology, the problem, and then understanding in our case, the biology that exists in the relationship between host and parasite that really led to it. That was really eventually what led to the World Food Prize package that you wanted to know.
Yes. So Prof, I think the next question that I'll ask you is coming from the chats, and what the person is asking is, how do we address the improved seed variety from one country to the other? I guess what he's asking is, everybody seems to be improving the variety of seeds in different countries and with different methods and different approaches. How do we build an umbrella or build collaborations that can bring some of these solutions together to help countries that possibly are not getting it right?
I am so glad to get this question. Really, this is the biggest bottleneck in the continent. I know there are a lot of problems that we need to solve. Each is very important. But the thing that is really bottlenecking development in the continent is not having a delivery system for technologies. That is a very simple thing to do. In other countries, the way they've done it is they established a private seed sector that is driven by the profit motive. And so in America, it started with small companies that are formed in different states. In each village, or not necessarily each village, in each region of the country, the state, there would be a small company that would sell seed to the farmers in their neighborhood. These businesses are people from the community that got up and started this business, knowing that the university in their country is developing these varieties. So they built this seed delivery system, and to prepare seeds and condition them properly, cleaning them up, and making sure that they're really good quality seed that the farmer needs, and sold it to the farmers. When the relationship between the farmers and the business is very important, because the company holder will realize that if the farmer succeed, he will succeed too, and vice versa. And the farmers also believe in that. These small mom and pop operations are around the states, and they really deliver these technologies for their farmers. And the extension service in the government then worked in between to evaluate the technologies and see the success of the seed companies. So seed companies are really dynamic programs in each community that were formed. As the country's economy grew, then these companies got bigger and bigger, and began to address problems across the state in a wide geographic area, and eventually became moving from several states across the states as well. And so I say that the private sector is the weakest in Africa, and that is the greatest bottleneck to delivery of technologies. And for that, in the past, when developing countries started their seed companies, they relied on companies in developed world, in America and other places. But that all changed with the advent of the biotechnology, because companies did not want to open themselves out where their technologies would be stolen. And so they were now willing to train seed companies in developing countries. The last ones they did was in Brazil and Argentina before they got to be big. So the advent of biotechnology was a plus for the developed world, was a total negative in my mind for opportunities in developing countries. But we need to establish private seed companies in each African countries to serve their regions within. And if that is successful, eventually one of these African companies would be able to big enough to make the right investment to address varieties and distributions in several countries. But the distinction I make may not be very clear to others. I think when varieties are developed, open pollinated variety we call them, once you give the seed to a farmer can save that seed. But the one that really encourages private sector development is seed of hybrid seeds, like the one I developed, because that seed needs to be delivered every year. If that is a need, then the companies are making profit, they would deliver that seed. That's why development of hybrids opens doors for establishing seed companies. They make money and therefore they will commit themselves to do it. The open pollinated varieties, you can sell only the seed once and the farmer can save seed and use it over, but eventually will not have the same quality. They may have to go back, but they don't do it because they don't think they need to go and buy the seed. So it's private seed company formation in African countries is a major need that exists. And this starts the beginning of private sector development in my mind that would extend to other technologies, other problems that need to be solved. Private sector engagement as a partner with the public government is very important. Our African governments believe that they are the ones that stand to serve the poor. Private sectors are people who just exploit the poor and they don't serve the poor. I think that mindset needs to change so that we have our educated young people forming these seed companies, understanding the problem, understanding the hurt of the farmers, helping them so that they can also help themselves in growing their companies, growing the area of influence in their own countries as well as potentially across the country. This simple concept has not been accepted by governments of African countries, and yet that becomes a tremendous obstacle for technologies reaching our poor farmers in Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the private sector, as we have heard this evening, has a lot of role to play in commercializing some of these technologies and making sure it reaches as wider audience farmers as possible. So I think that is well received. There's another question from our participants. They are asking about genetically modified organisms. There's been a debate on social media and on different platforms as to whether these organisms are harmful or not. What is your take on it, and how do you think should be the best practices when it comes to genetically modified organisms?
The danger that came with genetically modified organism aura is really a misplaced debate. And I said, this started with in the 70s, in the early 80s, late 70s, for the first time since the discovery of DNA, the chemical companies started in investing in seed business. They saw that if they could come up with a seed technology that could protect the plant from certain insects or pests and diseases, then they would be able to sell seed as well as chemicals at the same time. And they did that in the United States first. When that happened, a war started, a propaganda war started between America and American businesses and European businesses. Europeans were the last one were not the first one. So they knew they were outcompeted by the American companies. So they created some debate about the harm of genetically modified organisms to the environment, to humanity at large. But I really think it was a political, economic debate that was misplaced, putting emphasis on the products and then talk about the science in general. So that created, as for Africans, a total disadvantage. And that disadvantage is these companies would now want to take their technologies to Africa because the opportunity for marketing it is not great. African countries don't have a lot of hard money, hard currency that they could take out, but also the fact that, and then the misplaced debate I'm talking about is, on one side, the Europeans are saying GMOs are bad for you, and then they said Africans don't want to eat GMO because the European bosses are telling them. But really, the debate was the technologies were really not available for Africans to start with. No variety was developed with African farmers in mind. Technologies that were developed was to help farmers in the developed world that can afford to buy the seeds and pay them regularly, and then to make African farming a lot easier for the farmers in America and Europe. So I think the overemphasis is a misplaced talk to talk about dangers of GMO. It is a specific, a case-by-case basis that you have to talk about whether or not that technology has some harm or not. But generally, GMOs have not shown. I was on a panel that's when I was a member of the board for natural resources and the National Academy board. We had sponsored a study, and it was done. The evidence very clearly shows that there is not damage to speak about, maybe potentially in some insects and so on and so forth. But other than that, in terms of health, there wasn't any direct evidence that says that these technologies in large are harmful at all. But the debate was an economic political propaganda that created to protect the investments between American businesses and European businesses that really pushed the story in the wrong side.
Wow. This is the first time I'm hearing this side of the story. And I'm sure a lot of us are also hearing this for the first time. We have all formed our own.
There is a saying that I also end this story by saying that there is an African saying that when two elephants fight, it's the grass that gets damaged.
Yeah, the forest suffers for it. Yeah, so it's the first time I've actually heard a background information that is actually helpful. We've all formed our own opinion about the debate, and this is a very helpful and informative information for us. Fad, your hand has been up for a long time. Sorry, we are now opening the channels. So if you want to ask the good prof a question yourself, this is the time to do it. You can lift your hand. We'll ask you to unmute, and then you can ask your question. So Fuad, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Taviri. Thank you very much, Prof, for having you on this session. I'm Fuad from Harama University, and I have also the privilege to meet you before in person because I was working on sorghum, which is resistant for this striker. And I'm also one of the witnesses which have been seeing your jobs. Saying this, I do have a question, especially currently in our situation. Another parasitic weed is emerging, which is affecting pulse crops like groundnut and cowpea, and still so much has not been done. So when I was visiting the fields, I was a little bit shocked because, as you know, especially in Hararge areas, farmers commonly grow intercropping, sorghum and common beans and groundnuts and something like that. So in a same field, I was observing parasitic weed of striga under the sorghum, and parasitic weed, another parasitic weed, which is Electra vogeli, underground nuts, and again for Banche underground. So I thought that the upcoming challenge is very difficult for the scientists, and on top of that, this new parasitic weed is not identified. And so, what would you suggest us to do in this case? Maybe if it's clear.
There are a few countries that have worked in those. I think Israel, one, and in Spain, in Italy, places like that, on Electra. And so their work primarily is more agronomic, and then they work in ISIPE also on management, crop management. But genetic work on the legumes have not been as successful as there has been in cereals. But agronomic practices, including chemical control and rotations and stuff, is what is suggested in general.
Okay, Prof. HP, your mic is on. Do you want to ask Prof a question?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Kubabo from Harama University as well. I actually know Professor in person. Professor, thank you very much for your talk and sharing your rich experience. My question is, you know, the hard fact in Africa today is that the young people are really running away from agricultural programs in universities. If the interest of the young is not in agriculture, how can we really satisfy the needs of, you know, the professionals you mentioned earlier in your speech? This is a very big challenge. Some of, you know, the well-known agricultural programs, including plant science, are now these days not getting students. That is shocking. So my question is, how can we make the fields of agriculture attractive to the young generation in Africa? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm afraid that the Ethiopian situation is unique in that there is another story behind it, and this situation about the high school problems really exaggerated and creating an artificial problem for the country. So I think in general, agriculture has never been as sexy as some of the other sciences in general, but it was the same way as you described in my generation. But perhaps over time, as there were more and more opportunities that were created in agriculture, and people developed a more positive mindset about agriculture in general. But the current situation, I'm afraid, is this enrollment problem that has started with this examination issue that developed in Ethiopia that really cut back the enrollment across the board for all students. And then as chances are given to the few students, these few students are choosing other areas that they didn't have opportunity to study before. But agriculture, again, we need to do to make agriculture sexier, you know, the kind of job that people would want to get. And if we practice agriculture in the open area on farms, the same way our farmers used 3,000 years ago in an old country like Ethiopia, then it's not going to be attractive for young people coming in. But we really need to change the nature of agriculture by changing agricultural practices to modern ways without damaging the environment. That's what needs to be made. And then as economic opportunities arise in agriculture, agriculture would truly be sexy enough that for young people would do exactly the kind of job that I said in terms of digital technology, people would get into it as well. But farming itself needs to be mechanized and not be the back-breaking operation that it has always been. In every operation that is done out in the field, done by hand, not mechanized, it just needs to change as fast as it can possibly made. And again, I say, without damaging the environment through exposure to chemicals and things like that, and ruining the soils of the continent. But agriculture needs to change. That changes starts with African governments supporting private sector activity, where private businesses see good opportunity that makes profit for them, also makes livelihood change for poor African farmers. That is what needs to be realized. And this notion I'm talking about, the private sector across the board, not only in agriculture, but particularly important in agriculture. And so our technologists need to move up, to be upgraded, and not be the big, the back-breaking operation that has always been. So those changes will need to take place to make agriculture attractive to young people. But it starts, we don't need to put the cart before the horse. I think the sequence is that governments need to change their mind to encourage private sector, and so that private sector businesses are operational, people are employable in these businesses, not only by government. So when those opportunities arise, agriculture would be more and more attractive for the next generation to come, because our generation certainly benefited a great deal, and from at the end of the Second World War up to more recently. But the farm situation has really not changed. The farmers' system has not been changed. The farmers' livelihood have not been changed. We really haven't done very well for our poor, and we really need to do that. To need livelihood change, create opportunities. Electrification in rural communities needs to be increased. And when you do that, you can start businesses that use energy in the communities and so on. Those kinds of agriculture needs to look different, significantly different from the past in the near future, if you're really going to use it as an engine of change for development in the continent.
Yeah. So the next question, Mohammed, your mic is on. Do you want to ask Prof a question? And we are wrapping up. We have less than 10 minutes to go. So please, let's bring our questions in. Go ahead, Mohammed.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Tabiri. Good evening to everyone. Good evening to Prof. Thank you for the lectures. Yeah, so I just want to draw your attention. You mentioned that in a year to come, 1.6 billion youth will be out for job, and only 400 million job will be available. And now in the agricultural sector in a country is the key to sustaining ourselves. We're looking at in Africa, we have so many challenges. There are other countries, they face with drought that you mentioned earlier. And other countries, they are blessed with huge potential of rainfall. Now, the issue of, let's say, agriculture, other countries, take for example, they spend less than 10% on their budget for agriculture. And in a rural area where you have people practice subsistence farming, now what can the government do to increase the production of agriculture so that people can get food? They will not be at risk for food security, especially countries that have high potential of rainfall. That is my question.
I'm going to be speaking in general because your question is general too. I really think that it's...
For example, in Liberia, in my country, Liberia.
Yeah. I think, technology is the key. Technology is the key, education is the key, and policy is important. One of the things that I really would like to hammer, as scientists, young or old, we really don't like to work with policymakers or pay attention to policymakers. That's a mistake. Policymakers have impact on the things that we do. We need to have line of communication between our universities and policymakers, and maybe create a way in which we can have our input in the decision-making process with data-driven, science-driven decisions that need to be made. But working with government, influencing them, encouraging them to pay attention to the problems in the country is very important. They can affect that. They can invest to bring about change. So this communication is important to make sure that the needs of the poor farmers are met, opportunities are created. But we really have a long, long way to go in building the right kind of institutions, even with assistance from outside in the past. And now, when these assistance are drying up, it has to be a belt tightening period in each African country, and therefore we need to be very serious about it, very determined, very disciplined in making sure that we really have our food supply taken care of, and really, and more than that, the farmers, the large number of farmers in the African continent that produce our food, they are the first one to go hungry, and that's really cruel. That's unreal for that to happen. But we need to have a government that is very sensitive to the needs of the poor farmers, and changes can be made. I really think some of the examples you hear about Rwanda and places like that is great stories that can bring about change in a very short period of time. The right government, the right conditions of governance there maybe could be an example. But I think a country like Nigeria, there's no way in this world that hunger and so on could be a problem in Nigeria, even though the large number of population that you have. Nigeria is a country of great potential, but just the right conditions need to come up with the private sector, with government and so on, working together. But each situation may be different about each country, but in general, believing in the power of technology and power of science is a beginning of advice that I would start with. And because if those are implemented properly, with opportunities not only for the poor farmers, which we are targeting, agriculture professionals also need to be taken care of and paid sufficiently well, so that they serve their nation without corruption, without compromise for the service of the country. I don't believe the challenge is that huge, other than the fact that we really have not learned. Our governance has not been good in the continent for decades. And it changes from decade to decade. But I think I recently spoke at the World Food Prize, and I said right after independence, with dynamic leaders I mentioned Kwame Nkrumah, Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, Haile Selassie in Ethiopia, Sekou Touré in Guinea, and Tafawa Balewa in Nigeria, and they were great people. But then a lot of revolution in the continent that really took us down the dirty road, and now there is a mix. But I think our leadership has a lot to do with it, and I think some of our African leaders today understand what is needed. They fully understand it, and perhaps changes may begin to come as I was speaking at the World Food Prize. I spoke very positively about Ghana, on how Ghana has been a great example in governance, in democracy, in elections since 1992, 10 elections successfully, and the last 4 transferred from one party to another, and so on. So these are great examples and changes that have taken place in a positive way. In universities, you can say the same. I think there are some exceptional universities in the continent that are really purpose-driven, that are emerging, but the government needs to pay attention to them to make sure that this private sector that I repeatedly talk about becomes a reality, so that these universities can be purpose-driven in the way they train and the way they place their graduates. We have a long way to go, but really needs a time for belt tightening and time for demanding our governments, And I think if young people with the statistic I gave is really the future doesn't look good, I think we need to raise the clamor to make sure that attention, again, I'm not asking for revolution, but really, positive way of engaging with the government to bring about change.
Yeah, Prof. It has been an enjoyable conversation. It's hard to think that 1.5 hours have just passed quickly within a blink, and that is because the conversation has been enjoyable. So, Prof, your last words for the team here, and a lot more people will be watching this after this meeting. So, whatever you have for us will travel far. So, your last words for the team.
Well, I really have said a lot. I don't have much to add, but just really what I really hope you see is, as you look up to us, because we're older, we're ahead of you, just look up to our path, the path that we traveled. It's not without problems, but yet it is a path that we traveled. We've been given an opportunity. We've been given an opportunity and excelled in the opportunities that we've been given to make a difference in the lives of people. Having that kind of senior leadership to look up to is very important. I benefited from that kind of history ahead of me as I grew up in high school and college in Ethiopia, and the quality of education that I received is from people that I respected. So I am very hopeful. Every time I see young people, I'm really excited, and I'm in the various mentoring program that I'm involved in. It's a delight for me because the future of our country is in your hands. But one of the things that I would beg is you need to be patient. You need to earn your stripes. Just work hard, have a work ethic, patience, and also perseverance to succeed. But do something good with your life as you succeed, as you get opportunities. It's not enough that you're paid, you're earning your living, but also see if you can pay back and you can make a difference. You can pay forward by encouraging young people that you're working with. So I am very optimistic about the future of Africa, and that's why this ARIST initiative that I really got involved in, and the opportunity that it provides good technologies in the hands and the minds of young people with which they can help themselves and also help their communities is really very important. But we need to, at the same time, those of our older, we need to also work with the leadership of the countries and so on, trying to influence good judgment on the parts of the governance that operates in each country. So I leave you on an optimistic note that I'm counting on you. I'm counting on each one of you with the hope that you would excel the achievements that we had in contributing to the continent that we all love.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. I mean, this is a good note to end. The baton has been handed over to us. And we've heard a story of Prof, and we have taken a lot of lessons from this, where he started from. And I like the fact that the story is no different from the common African kid who starts from somewhere, and then along the line, opportunities open up, and what you do with those opportunities count. And Prof has told us whenever those opportunities come around, we should make sure we excel in it and even go far. And in doing that, we should remember to do the work that is important and the work that will make an impact on the continent and around the world. And as we do that, we will get recognized for it. I think this is the story that we've heard tonight. and this afternoon, and we appreciate it very much, Prof. We are going to actually call you back. We are going to run a series of workshops in thematic areas in agriculture, in material science, and in other thematic areas. And we will be happy to invite you as one of the trainers for those workshops. It will be certificate programs that people will come. They will get trained, get certified on it, and then they can go do their job with it. So thank you very much, Prof, for coming around. This remains the Young African Scientist platform. Next week, we are going to have our machine learning course. Our teacher that taught last week will continue. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming around. God bless you, and see you next week. Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, have a good beginning of winter. All right, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.